All right, everybody. Welcome to lesson 4 on mindset called brain plasticity. So, plasticity is just a fancy word for change. So, your brain's ability to change is called plasticity. And your brain, looking similar to this, is made up of billions of nerve cells called neurons. And the more you learn, the more pathways you create between your neurons. So let's see how this works. Let's first start by thinking about taking a little hike. Usually when you take a hike, you are on well beaten down pathways or trails where you can actually see where it's going and where someone's been, and it's very marked out in front of you, similar to this picture on the left. However, say you're walking through the woods and then over to the right you see a beautiful meadow, okay, and there's not really a trail there. You basically would have to blaze your own trail, similar to this here on the right. So in order to get to that meadow, you would have to make a pathway. Maybe you cut down some bushes. Lots of people will walk behind you, right? Over and over and over again until it's well, beaten down path and very clearly marked. So in order to travel in this path, you have to make sure the pathway is clear. So, and the same thing kind of applies to your brain. When you learn something new, it's like going to this meadow here on the right-hand side. You don't have a clear pathway to it. Your neurons aren't used to going that way. And so you need to practice in order to make a clear pathway between those two cells to get to that new information. See over here on the left, this is like stuff you know how to do very easily. Maybe, riding a bike or swinging a bat or playing an instrument or, answering 2 + 2 = 4. All of those things have been ingrained in your brain due to practice. And so they are a very quick and easy accessible pathway. But when we're learning something new, like a bunch of things in chemistry, we need to make sure that we prepare our brains to explore new pathways. So let's take a look and see how our brains make new connections. At this point, you guys are going to stop this video and head back to Haiku and click on the link that's called Neuron Model video. So you'll watch, I think it's about 3 or 4 minutes of this video. And as you watch, you have a little half sheet of paper in front of you. Jot down some notes as to how your brains make new connections. So once again, please pause this video and go back to Haiku and click on the Neuron Model video under the in-class video links there. All right, so what we found out in the video is that neurons that fire together wire together, meaning that neurons that work together help us do new things. Okay, so if they are communicating and firing with each other, they're going to make good connections and nice, firm, well-beaten paths to get that new information in your head. So when we know how to do something well, it's because the neurons that are required for that task are firing very quickly. So the more these neurons fire, the more efficient we are at the task. So that means the more and more we do something, the more and more our neurons fire together and wire together and help us figure out that information. So this little mantra here, practice makes easier. Not perfect, but practice makes easier. The more and more you practice at something, anything, okay, whether it's dance or music or, riding a unicycle or studying chemistry, the more you practice, the easier it's going to be. All right, now a lot of you are finding chemistry a really hard subject. And that's because you don't have very much basis for these new concepts in your brain. You haven't made new connections for the information that you're learning. So what's happening is that your neurons are making new connections with each other. And this takes time and it takes practice. So if you're not allowing yourself to take the time or to practice, aka study, okay, outside of class, you're not going to find chemistry any easier, guaranteed. Okay, so the more you practice and study, the faster those neurons are going to fire together, and the easier chemistry or any other subject is going to become. But you have to make sure you take the time to practice and study, and you have to realize that everybody's brain is different. So that means that some brains might just take a couple of times, a couple of practices to get it down. Okay, other brains may need more and more and more practice to get it down. All right, it does not mean you're dumb or stupid. It just means that your brain needs a little bit more time. So you need to recognize that and give your brain some more time in order to make those connections between neurons so that you can make chemistry a lot easier for you. All right, so right now we're going to pause for just a sec so that you guys can get the fun part of this activity. The substitute teacher is going to pass out a little baggie of Twizzlers. So go ahead and pause the video and pass out the Twizzler baggies, one to each group. And each person should grab a Twizzler from the baggie. All right, so now that everybody has their Twizzlers, the first thing we should do is pull them apart. So you can see that there's just a bunch of little ropes all together. So pull all the little ropes apart. And as you're doing that, remember that what we're going to be doing is simulating neurons, basically firing together in order to make a path in our brain a lot clearer and easier. So the more the axon path sends an electrical signal, the stronger that pathway becomes and the easier that task is. And so what we're going to do is we're going to model this. You've got on your piece of paper a neuron cell. And on the left, you have the big part with all kinds of squiggly lines coming out from it. Then you've got a big space, and at the other side, on the right side, you have, looks kind of like a little end with suction cups. Okay, so what we're going to do is for each of these scenarios or questions below, you're going to place a Twizzler down where the axon should be. So on your papers, you're going to place a little Twizzler, little piece of rope, okay, that you tore apart, in between the left half and the right half of the neuron. Okay, the left half we're going to find out it's called the cell body, and the right half is going to be called the presynaptic terminal. All right, so think of something new you have recently learned. Okay, so think of something new that you have recently learned. Don't need to share it, just have it in your head. All right, if you learned something new recently, put down a Twizzler between the cell body and the presynaptic terminal. Now, if you were challenged by this new learning, put down another little Twizzler between the presynaptic terminal and the cell body. If you made mistakes at first when learning this, again, put down another Twizzler part between the two ends of the neuron. Did you do homework to help you practice with this new concept? If so, put down a Twizzler between the two cell parts. Now, did you do any other things? Like maybe extra practice problems, or looking at the study guide, or taking a look at different videos on YouTube about the subject? If so, put down another Twizzler between the cell body and the presynaptic terminal. Did you apply your new skill or knowledge? Meaning, did you use it to solve a problem, or did you relate it to something in your life? If you did, put down another little Twizzler part between the two parts of the cell. Did you practice your new skill? If so, put down another Twizzler. Did you practice your skill again? If you did, put down another Twizzler. And finally, did you practice your new skill yet again? Then put down another Twizzler between your cell body and the presynaptic terminal. Okay. So ideally, you should have no Twizzler little pieces in your hand still. Okay. Because they all should be making this big fat axon terminal, okay, between the two parts of the neuron. Okay. Because if you did all of these things with each, concept that you learned, okay, A, if you learned something new, B, if you were challenged by it and you made mistakes, you did the homework, you did other things, you practice, and you applied your knowledge, you have made a really good pathway with your neurons. And you probably found that as you did that task or that concept became easier. Now, if you're holding a lot of Twizzler little pieces in your hand, you may still be thinking that whatever you learned new is really hard. And that's because you didn't take the time to make that pathway in your brain a lot easier to quote unquote walk through. Okay. So think about this next time you learn something new. Next week, we're going to learn new things about chemistry. So if you want your axons to be nice and thick and make a good pathway, you've got to do these things. You've got to learn it. You've got to be challenged by it. You got to make mistakes. You got to do homework. You got to apply it. And you have to practice. Okay, so the last part of this little activity is basically identifying the parts of the neuron. Okay, and these arrows are in the wrong places, but I'll correct that. Okay, so let's label and define your neuron parts. So the first one we're going to take a look at is the presynaptic terminal, and that is this part right here. So this arrow should be pointing, bam, right there. Okay. So that presynaptic terminal, information moves between the presynaptic terminal and the dendrites of another neuron through chemical signals. So this is where the information is passed between neurons. And it's a chemical information. It's a little chemical symbol. Neurotransmitters, you've probably heard of that word, flow between the presynaptic terminal of one one neuron, okay, to the dendrites of another. And that's what we're going to take a look at next. So information is passed from one neuron to another. All right, the second one on our list is dendrites, and these are the little receivers, okay? So those are little receivers on the neuron, and say they receive incoming messages from other cells and send it through the cell body, okay? So the presynaptic terminal passes, okay, information on, and the dendrites receive information. So if you are practicing and being challenged and apply your information and do homework and practice, practice, practice something, you are strengthening that connection between presynaptic terminals and dendrites. That chemical signal is going to pass a lot quicker when we have those pathways down. All right, finally, the last two are the axon and the cell body. Let's start with the axon here. The axon is the big thing that you just made with Twizzlers. Okay, so the axon is that long, skinny part, and information travels down that axon away from the cell body towards the presynaptic terminal. Okay, it's the information highway in your brain. Okay, so that's how information gets sent from one part of the cell to the other. It's our information highway. Now the cell body is this guy here. It's the big fat thing in the middle. It's kind of like the little egg. Okay, the cell body generates an electric signal to send information to another cell. So what's happening is that you are receiving info on the dendrites. Okay, and if enough of those dendrites receive signals, they are going to send their that signal to the cell body, and the cell body sends that signal down to the axon, and then at the axon, it goes to the presynaptic terminal, and then it sends that information out of all these little terminals there to the next cell body. Okay, the next set of dendrites down. So these guys here will receive information, and then they're going to send it to that cell body, and it keeps going. And this happens in a blink of an eye. It happens so fast. Everything that you do and your body controls is doing this super fast. All right, so if you want to learn something new, you have to make new connections between neurons. And that's what this whole little mindset lesson was about. You've got to take the time to practice, and learn something new in order to be successful at a new task.